Good morning, United Kingdom. Good morning, and welcome
Good
to
morning.
the live drive time session with Lakhi Singh, the property fixer. This morning, we have a wonderful guest. Her name is Julie Ford. She's going to be on this morning as well with us after another 5 or 10 minutes after the introduction. And again, Lakhi Singh, good morning. The property fixer, the live drive time session every morning, Monday to Friday. How you doing,
Morning, viewers. Hope you're all well.
Yeah.
I wanted to say a big thank you for pushing the group up to nearly 9:35 now.
9:35. I think we're going to actually announce, possibly tomorrow, if not on Friday, that there's going to be some special gift or activity, I think, for the 1,000th member. So I'm not sure whether they've got that arranged, but we will find out by Friday. I'll get a thumbs up from the team. Is that right? So, what's the weather like there, Lakhi Singh?
The weather is nice and sunny and bright this morning, so it's going to be a fantastic day, like every day.
Fantastic, fantastic. And you're fantastic. The property fixer, the ixer, the mixer, the mover, the hoover, the shaker, the maker of the square mile in London, Mr. Lakhi Singh, the man who makes things happen. And this week's saying that if you get offered a ticket on the rocket, don't ask what seat, just get on. Obviously, that it has a different meaning for different people. So before I ask Lakhi Singh what that means, we're going to invite on Miss Ford. Can we get her on? Is she there? She's backstage. Morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
Great, great. All the better for listening to you and seeing you join us. Right. So,
morning, Julie. How are you doing?
Julie, what part of the United Kingdom are you at?
I'm in very sunny Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire today.
Hemel Hempstead, yes. Greater London. Is that right? And yes.
We're more outside of London.
Okay, so you don't like to be regarded as being in London. You like to be regarded as more Aylesbury, do you? More.
Oh, I wouldn't go as far as Aylesbury. That's pushing it a bit.
Okay. Aston, what's it now? Aston.
A little bit between Aylesbury and London. I'm in the middle.
In the middle. Being in the middle is not a bad thing all the time, I reckon.
Absolutely.
So, Julie, before we go on to you jumping on a rocket and not wanting to worry about the seat number, give us a bit of an introduction about yourself. I know we've been told through secret information that's been revealed about you that you are a managing agent, I think, for properties. I believe you've been in that industry for a while, and that you actually did a law degree, but for some reason did not decide to practice or take the various practice exams. So tell us about yourself, please, before we continue, so everyone knows who they are listening to.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So I've been in lettings and property management probably about 25 years now. My main job was working in the city only, yeah. My main job was working in the city as a property and asset manager for a large corporation where we manage properties all over the world. Most of my clients were celebrities. Most of my clients were celebrities, so a few I can mention. Ricky Gervais was one of my clients as a landlord, and I've been a few Premiership footballers as well have been my landlords.
Ricky.
Everyone loves Ricky.
Yeah, Ricky Gervais. I think Ricky lives somewhere over in, is it Hemel Hempstead somewhere? No, it's not Hemel.
He
It's
doesn't live in Hemel
Hampstead.
Hempstead. However, he does film a lot here in Hemel Hempstead. His TV show Afterlife is filmed here in Hemel.
That's right. I
So
think
we
he
do
lives
get to
there, or
see
at
him
least,
around quite a lot.
yeah, I think he lives somewhere over in Hampstead. Is it Hampstead? I think is where he lives.
Probably.
Yeah, somewhere in Hampstead. Okay.
Yeah,
Actually, his
exactly.
the guy that looks like him is a good friend of mine, his impersonator, and I think we might be doing some sketches with him for the show.
Cool.
Okay, he's the impersonator for Ricky Gervais. Very nice. Okay, continue, Julie. So you were letting and managing properties globally, and you had famous people. You mentioned Ricky. Who else? I'm sorry, because as soon as you said Ricky, I was trying to work out which Ricky this is. Is it Ricky O'Sullivan or Ricky Gervais, and what the difference is? There's a big difference. Sullivan is a greasy mechanic, I know, in London. Normally does lots of dodgy car work, gets lots of complaints. So you and anybody else on your list, VIP list?
Premiership footballers, but obviously they come and go quite quickly, so I couldn't really list those off. Plus, I'm not really into football myself, so I don't really know if they're really good or not either. But from the property management side of things, I then moved into new build sales, which was a bit of a left field for me. And what I found with that was there wasn't a real platform there for when people have bought off plan and then something goes wrong and there's a snagging list that needs to be done, because obviously the architects and all the builders and everything are concentrating on the next phase of the build, so there was no one there to sort of fix the problem. So that's, I kind of built up the snagging department almost, so to speak, for this development company, and just grew it from there. And then I took a bit of a I know. Then I took a bit of a step, opening my own property management company, which is called Gothard Row, and I've had that for 11 years now. So
Gothard Row.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yes. Sorry.
So built up the portfolio from nothing to managing just over 500 properties, and that was in the Norfolk area.
Only 500.
Yeah, just a few. So I built that up while I was living in Norfolk, which was a bit of a move for me. And then I sold that portfolio, but I kept the company name. And what I've done from then is sort of a bit of evolving, really. I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. After I'd done my law degree at uni, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. I wanted originally to be a criminal barrister, but that didn't come to fruition. I got married in between, and you know what it's like. You get your degree and you go, right, I'll go to the bar next year. I'll go to the bar next year. And all of a sudden you're 10 years later and you're like, I never went to the bar. So it never really came to fruition, but that was fine. It wasn't an issue for me.
Probably
and
not
then
a good idea anyway to go to the bar during lunchtime. Probably good to stay sober. It helps you in your work.
Well, it depends. Some people function quite well after a couple of glasses of wine.
So you're having lots of wet lunches, were you, normally?
Well, unfortunately, when you work in the city in that day and age, yeah, they were pretty wet.
Wet lunches. Okay. So you worked in the city and you had lots of wet lunches. You ended up in, how did you end up in Norfolk then? What was that about?
That was just a bit of a personal situation for me. I had a family member who became poorly, so I went up there to look after them. And it's like everything, obviously they passed away. And for me, it was like, what am I going to do? I'm stuck here in Norfolk. What's a girl to do in Norfolk? Because that's a very much slower pace of life than I was used to in London. So, I had those skills, I had that experience, I had that knowledge.
Which part of Norfolk were you in?
I was in Swaffham.
Is that by the sea?
No, it's not. It's sort of, do you know Dereham?
Everyone is a new name to Lakhi Singh. Okay. Dereham and Swaffham. Can you do something a bit more Norwichy?
Yeah,
Norwich, that makes sense.
Norwich, but inland.
Inland towards us. Okay, that makes sense now. So Norwich and inland, about an hour inland to Norfolk. So that's like the real centre of Norfolk, isn't it?
Yeah,
in the middle
much.
of nowhere in the sticks.
Yeah. It's like no man's land.
Swaffham,
yes, absolutely,
and Dereham. That sounds like really a forest. Is that where you were?
Yeah, Norfolk is surrounded by Thetford Forest, so it is quite rural there.
Rural, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. So coming from the city, what did you end up doing then in the middle of Swaffham and in Dereham?
So I started, like I say, I started my property management company, and that's all it was to start with. I didn't do any lettings associated with that. I would work with other letting agents that didn't have substantial property management departments. So I would be their outsourced property management, so they could carry on doing the letting side of things, because that didn't really interest me. I'm not really a salesy kind of person. I leave that to the people with the pointy, shiny shoes. And I just left myself with the property management side of things, which, as a natural problem fixer, for me, property management is just a brilliant fit. I love the fact that it's one of those jobs where no matter who you're speaking to, nobody likes you. The tenant doesn't like you, the landlord doesn't like you, your boss doesn't like you. You know, everyone's shouting at you. You can't do right for doing wrong.
The tenant doesn't like you. Let me get absorb that. So as a property, are you saying as a property agent or as a property fixer? Nobody likes
as a property
you.
manager. As a property manager.
So the tenant doesn't like you. The landlord doesn't like you. Who else doesn't like you?
The tenant doesn't like you, and 9 times out of 10, your boss doesn't like you either.
So they don't like you. So that's okay. That's a good job to be in. It's a bit like being. It's actually like a bit like being a solicitor or being a mechanic, isn't it? It's the same type of, what's it now? The dispute that they give you for no reason. Yeah. So what happened then? Okay, so you were being hated by all directions. What happened?
My career took a change in direction. So I came then and moved to Hemel. So before I did that, I sold the portfolio of management properties, but I kept the company name in case I ever wanted to do something more with it. And came to Hemel, and the one thing that Hemel was missing was a property networking meeting. So I set that up, and that's now been running for a number of years as well. That's in its 9th year. So I'm quite successful with that. It's independent, and it's not a selling platform like some of the other networking events. You kind of like go along and buy my book and I'll teach you how to be a millionaire. I don't do that. I think there is a platform for those particular networking events, because everybody needs to go somewhere to learn how to buy their first property or grow their portfolio. Absolutely. But what those networking events tend to then not do is, once you've got the keys in your hand, they don't teach you how to be a good landlord. They don't teach you how to understand the legislation and just take the baby steps into being a landlord and what's important, and understand that you're actually running a business.
Seems like you've got a knack for a sort of getting in the grey areas and trying to fix things which nobody else likes to talk about. So yes. You've done it on the snagging side, and you've also done it in your networking. Is it actually an event, or is it a webinar now, or what is it with the lockdown?
Well,
are you actually still running it?
Prior to lockdown, it was physical events. So we'd have obviously members turning up to the events once a month. We'd have a speaker, we'd have a legal update, but those speakers wouldn't be the normal circuit speakers that you'd normally see in the networking field. These would be local businesses or local landlords talking about their stories and, the pros and cons of getting into property, because, we like to see all those wonderful shiny cars and the fantastic mansions, but we all know that actually property is quite hard work, as well as being quite lonely.
Okay, yeah. Continue. Have it blocked out? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Okay. So you take. Sorry, I didn't get that. Right. Okay. Yeah.
That's
so
fine.
okay.
Yeah,
I understand now. Okay. So you had live stories being told by the landlords, and it's probably a bit more sort of like face-to-face examples from real landlords who are having to deal with the problems of property, rather than trying to give, like you said, the rosy picture of the money side of property. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we'd have local businesses on as well, so local letting agent, local solicitor, local mortgage guy, to actually sit there and go through case studies, rather than, come to me because I'm the best mortgage advisor. That's not what I'm looking for in someone. I'm looking for someone to be giving a lot more to the network than they're taking away.
Excellent. That's quite interesting. It's a different way. It's alternative, which is what we've set up for. So it sounds like you're speaking our language. Okay. So at this present stage, are you still are you stuck in, is it Durham, or what's the other place called? Logan?
No, I'm in sunny Hemel Hempstead now, so I've been here.
Oh, yes, so you're now in, okay, you're back to Hemel. And so you were originally in Hemel Hempstead, went to Norfolk, and you've come back again. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, right. The question or the saying for this week is, to get offered a ticket on a rocket, don't ask for the seat number, just get on. What do you have to say to that as a saying? What does that mean to you? Are you like that? Or would you like to check out the fuselage, hopefully not while the rocket's ignited, but before you get onto the rocket? Do you want to know what seat is yours? Or would you rather just jump on for the ride?
I'm not interested in what seat number it is. Absolutely. I'd rather just jump on for the ride, but it has to be by a window seat. I need to be looking where I'm going.
Okay, so you need to see where the rocket's going.
Absolutely. I need to see the view. I need to see what's happening out there.
Excellent. I like that. So you like to see what happens. And that's probably going back to your powers of observation in terms of identifying grey areas in businesses and trying to make them your niche. Talking of powers, we're going back to Lakhi Singh, a man of his own superpowers, comes from the planet Krypton, and the only thing that can kill him or take his powers away are a piece of kryptonite or a big letter A, apparently, I've been told. So, Lakhi Singh, tell us about your powers and tell me what that saying means to you now after having listened to Miss Ford, the fact that she wants to see where she's going.
Well, I gave the analogy yesterday that because I don't know anything about the rocket ship, I wouldn't just jump on. For me, it would mean that I probably need to understand a lot more before I jumped onto anything, because I've done that too often in the past where I've jumped onto things quite sort of not really actually looking at where things are going necessarily, but it sounded fun at the time. So I'm actually like really laid back. Something comes along, it could be a rocket ship, it could be a trip to Buckingham Palace, it could be anything that sounds amazing. But I wouldn't really just do it just because it sounded good. I'd probably want to know a lot more.
You're probably very
so that would be my take on it anyway.
You're probably like was old.
Sounded like a dull accountant, don't I?
You sound like more like a grumpy old man, Mr. Singh. That doesn't sound like the energetic Mr. Singh, Propertyfixer Mr. Singh. But anyhow, let's jump over from there and go to the other question. Somebody who the question for today is, covert, I want to get a mortgage, and what can I do if I've got a problem with my credit file? So you've been in property for so long. What do you say to that? Is credit file an issue? Do you come across it a lot with your clients? How many clients are you servicing now?
Who are you addressing the question to? To
I'm
Julie
addressing,
or to me?
there's one good-looking lady and you, Mr. Singh. So I'm addressing the good-looking young lady.
For me, it would always be going to speak to a mortgage advisor, because unfortunately, I don't deal with the finance side of things with my clients and my landlords. But with regards to credit rating, I'm sure there's lots of things people can do to build that back. But it wouldn't be really for me at this point to say what that is. It's not my area of expertise, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to hand back to Lakhi for that.
Okay, Lakhi Singh, can you answer that question? Somebody needs a mortgage in the present scenario, and they've got a bit of a damaged credit file. Can they look to get a mortgage still?
Yes, I mean, talking to the property fixer, so anything's possible, but just got to be careful that you don't underestimate or overestimate your position by not understanding the reality of your position. So, for example, I had a client in yesterday. She's made bankrupt 5 years ago, been discharged. And for the next, I think, for about another year, it still shows on her record. So no Buytolet provider is really going to lend to her. So she's in a bit of a predicament because the credit file has that on there that is discharged, but it takes 5 years for it to clear completely off your credit file, for example. So the amazing thing about her situation was that this person's had ample equity in their assets and very low gearing. So the gearing's only around 30% loan to value on quite a large portfolio. So, but she's looking to raise 50,000, and she's been borrowing money from other people. But she's got over 1.3 million pounds worth of equity sitting in her assets. But she's actually borrowing money of 40,000 pounds at quite expensive rates from people and going into investments. So we worked out a structure from a private lender that would lend to her, and they would ignore the bankruptcy, and they would lend her easily £100,000 at quite a good rate, and they can get the money to her within 3 to 5 days. So do you need a good credit file? Yes, you do need a good credit file, because so the next thing that we're going to do is we've got a solution to also getting her a good credit file, but I can't really mention that on the show because it's a specialist area around solvency practices. So they'll have to give us some advice how to restructure herself, and we will be able to get that organized within about 4 to 8 weeks from now, and then she'll be able to get a mortgage as well. Although she will need to build up her credit file again. So everything's possible. So that's a very extreme situation. But for the normal day-to-day person, 9 to 5 person who's wants to maybe get their first property or get onto the ladder, it may be a bit different. If you got your deposit and you've got very clean credit, the likelihood is you're not going to have any major problems. But if you have got like a missed payment or some sort of default on a mobile phone or something of it sitting on your credit file, and you haven't been regularly checking it to see really how good your credit file is, then you could actually be in for a surprise. So one of my tips is that you should really be checking your credit file at least once a month, especially if you're it's an essential part of your ability to function in your business, especially being a landlord. So any glitches with your credit file are a major issue. So I suggest, as a protocol, most landlords won't be doing this, but get your bookkeeper or somebody else like your accountant to check your credit file. It might be worth paying them £50 or whatever it is for the time and effort to do it, because something like that as a slip up could be a disaster for your business. So the couple of points there which I think would be really useful for people out there that are looking to be clear about how to get their mortgage sorted. The only last thing I'd say is, to keep it brief, is that you can repair your credit file, and a lot of that is not about not for 6 months not doing anything. The more active you are with credit cards and making regular payments to them, actually builds up your credit file, is a critical point of note.
Okay, excellent. Right. Okay. Nearly put me to sleep there. Lakhi Singh I was about to go into a story, a slumber about my credit file and me fighting with it. But anyhow, right. The question is, and this is an interesting question that's going to come back to you, Lee. We have been obviously talking to various different type of estate agents, letting agents, and I believe that's your forte. Now, the question that we posed to a lot of these agents were, do you know the financial status of your clients, the landlords. And unfortunately, a lot of them happen to feel that it wasn't important for them to know, even though stats say up to 60 to 80% of landlords may be insolvent if they have to do a probate asset and liability status finding. So if they have to go in and look at their assets and look at what they owe against what they own and what they have in terms of liquidity, a lot of these landlords are sitting are as zombie landlords, as Lakhi calls them. We've discussed it before. Say what to you that is that the situation where you're at in Hemel Hempstead? Are a lot of your landlords zombie landlords, or are they sort of affluent people who've got good liquidity? Julie Ward, Julie Ford.
The volume's not coming up, Julie, for some reason.
She's muted herself to us. She probably went to sleep.
No, she's not muted, but for some reason she's talking, but we can't hear her.
She's gone to sleep, Lakhi.
No, she's talking,
I went to sleep
but
as well.
We can't hear for some reason. And she's not muted herself.
While we're waiting for Julie to come back and join us in the real world, I think she's
talking,
gone on
but I can see her. So she's talking, but she's not muted herself. So I think it may just be something wrong with your device.
My device?
Maybe worth actually, Julie, switching off and coming back in again. It's probably easiest. Just switch back off and come back in again.
Switch off Julie if we can.
Julie's going to switch off and come back in again.
While we do that, a big shout out to Amar, to Sonia, to Paul, to John, to Camera as well, and Mr. Noor making moves as usual from MC4U Commercials. We've got a new listener as well, a gentleman by the name of Paul Reading as well, who's joined us as well. That's it. Right, Lakhi Singh, have we got her back on? Lakhi Singh?
I am here, yeah.
You're here. Okay, let's continue with the conversation. Right, the question to you, sir. A lot of the landlords that you've come across apparently aren't as solvent as they should be. And a lot of the letting agents that you've come across over the years, you seem to suggest, are sitting on zombie landlords. Is that still the case? Managing agents literally playing on cash flows?
Yeah, what's happening is a lot of estate agents that are involved in lettings as a core part of their business don't necessarily realize the extent of risk they're carrying in terms of managing properties for certain clients.
Yeah.
So what's happening is a lot of clients are having a lot of clients that they've got may have a negative equity portfolio or poor cash flow, and the bank may be in the process of appointing receivers. So they're not always aware of what's really going on with them, because there's a bit of a fine line between knowing what the landlord's real position is and their lettings position with the agent.
Okay.
So I'm not too sure really whether the agent is in a position to be asking landlords for the information. So I think a lot of it just comes down to relationship management. If you're quite good at talking to your clients, knowing your client, as they say, then the more likely you have an inkling really with what type of issues might be behind the scenes for those landlords. I think Julie's back on now. Can you hear us, Julie?
Julie's back on. Julie, you left us.
Hear
You're
you.
back.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
We can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear now. Right. So Lakhi's obviously made a relevant point and said probably lots of agents obviously don't indulge into that area of insolvency with their landlords, and probably obviously not being part of their remit. But if it is an asset that you're managing, and a lot of the agents say that in the good old days, landlords are a bit more frivolous about the repair and maintenance cost of their properties, i.e. if a tenant turned around and said, oh, the light's gone, landlords would spend the money and get the light repaired for them. Now it's tightened up quite significantly, where landlords are being particular about saying to tenants, well, look, you've got to live in the property in a tenant-like fashion. Broad statement, but it does form part of the legal contract. Living in the property as a tenant and in a tenant-like manner means we're not going to change light bulbs because you need to do that. You're living there. If you keep the light bulb on all night, then so be it. Is that the case in Hemel Hempstead, or are you dealing with the likes of Ricky Gervais, who's probably got more money than any one of us has got, and he doesn't really care about the bills on his rental properties?
I think from a practical point of view, there is always going to be a diverse demographic of landlords. And especially here in Hemel, we have quite affluent areas, but we also have areas where they're not so affluent. And the landlords come in that same demographic as well. A lot of the landlords here, it's very much an HMO area. So we have a lot of HMO landlords. They're more of your seasoned landlords with a larger portfolio. So a lot of their cash flow is the fact that they now own the property rather than having mortgages on them. But the people that are coming into Hemel Hempstead trying to get into property, we're finding they're going for more SA. So serviced accommodation is quite rife here at the moment. And I think that's because we're so close to London. We're 26 minutes into London. And also we're in a position where we've got an awful lot of building work going on around here, and that planning is going on for some considerable time. So we've got a lot of contractors here. So that's great in that respect. But I think those are the people that maybe are looking at literally hand to mouth when it comes to the solidity of their property, really. And from an agent's point of view, I think they see that that's not really their responsibility and not really anything to do with them, how what the cash flow is for a landlord, because it's something that's outside of their remit. Whereas I think I agree with what you said. I think there's the security there for the tenant, because what if a landlord is only renting the property out because the mortgage company is already knocking on the door saying we're going to repossess next week, and the landlord's thinking, oh my God, I got to rent out, and unfortunately 6 weeks down the line the tenant's being evicted.
Julie, as usual, has her clever finger on the pulse, and she's picked up on the point that I made, that properties are not just assets. They're not just bricks and mortar. They involve people and people's lives. And if you've got a landlord who is insolvent or is having financial difficulties, he is putting at risk the life of somebody he is affording the rental of a property to. And by letting out his property to them, and even though they don't know, and this is quite common, remember, Julie, that tenants are in properties that have either been subject to the LPA receivers, and we've covered the topic of LPA receivers previously. Lakhi Singh and his organization are somewhat specialist in the area. And yes, LPA receivers knock on their inside saying to the tenant, well, you've got to pay us the rent over. We don't care who the landlord is. It must be very daunting for tenants not understanding what an LPA receiver is and not understanding who their loyalties lie with once they've signed a contract with the landlord, and the LPA receiver effectively says that he is the agent of the landlord. And people don't know that the legal definition of agent is quite much different than in the normal definition of agent in law. So yes, they are being affected, and I think it is a duty. And I think Julie is a wonderful lady who understands that these grey areas are the areas where people exploit, but also where the market is going to go in for a big jolt, because lots of landlords who have got financial problems, who are letting out these properties knowingly, because remember, any landlord who's got financial property problems, if he's responsible, should not really be letting these properties out, and should be managing the handback of those assets to the banks. But unfortunately, cash flow possibly, I think that's why the interest rates are low and people are still into properties. Okay, we've got a question in from Sonia. Sonia says that she had a friend who had 2 mortgage offers that were pulled. So 2 offers from the mortgage lender that got pulled, and the product was pulled from the market, and therefore her friend ended up with a problem on her credit file. Any advice, Lakhi Singh? That's the first one. The second is Mr. Bob Singh, who does the famous Lakhi Singh Propertyfixer sign for you. Yes, Julie, I think there's a wonderful feeling I get about you in terms of looking at things from the left field and realizing things aren't all as they seem. Do you find then, so are you predominantly working in the lettings market only and the AP market? I mean, even AP is a wonderful way of increasing yield for lots of landlords, but it probably does require the adding of services and stuff, a bit like a HMO. Do you deal on the sales side as well, or is it purely on letting and management?
At the moment, I don't deal with anything specifically to do with the landlord's property. I deal with what happens once there's a problem. So, for example, with obviously COVID-19, there's been lots and lots of problems for landlords and letting agents where tenants aren't paying their rent, or maybe tenants aren't allowing access to properties. So what I've done is change the business model slightly to be able to adapt to help landlords and letting agents who have that problem. So I will take on with a letting agent, and I will work with them if they've got a tenant that's not paying rent. And so far, everybody that I've worked with, I haven't met a tenant yet who won't pay the rent. I've met lots of tenants who can't pay the rent. There's a very big difference. The media would like to make us think that there's people out there just piling up their money under the bed because they're not paying the rent. But actually, it's a case of they can't pay the rent, which is very, very different. So I work with that tenant and I find out what the problem is, and I then eventually help landlord to get those arrears paid off and the tenant not evicted.
Okay. We've got about 11, 12 people watching us on YouTube as well today, which is good news. And we've sent a link out to everybody. So anybody want to come in, jump in and ask the wonderful Julie a question, or Lakhi Singh a question, you are quite welcome to do so. We will have you added in. Instead of us asking the question and me making a goof up of it, you can ask the question yourself and Julie or Lakhi can answer for you. Julie, I want to know who is a lucky man and what does he do with you? Is he in property with you, or are you a lone rangeress?
I'm doing this all by myself, I'm afraid.
Okay, on your own, lonely. Okay, Lakhi Singh, can you please answer the question? And we've got Amar as well. Kamran watching us on YouTube as well. Can you answer the question? Sonia says she's got a friend, got a mortgage twice. The product was pulled from the market with the banks. We know that's going on at the moment. The banks are toe dipping in and out and, you know, removing the product from the market less within a month or so. So, and it's impacted her credit file. So what advice can you give that person, or do you have any solutions for that type of a person?
I think, to be honest with you, in terms of super technical answers, is probably a very good question for Bob Singh. But I think my feeling on it would be that you've got to document everything, and if a lot of buy-to-let lenders are not fulfilling their obligations in terms of what they've committed to and pulling out last minute because they're short on money, or they're changing their criteria because they're worried about lending out more money than they can actually afford, or it's too risky for them, then what it's doing is inadvertently putting a lot of people into, let's say, a complicated situation where it puts them in a state of flux. So because it's not a known area in terms of what you can do with it, a lot of people are in limbo land. So what I'd say is my solution to this is that you might have to spend more money if you're quite serious about getting a mortgage for yourself. You can't rely upon one mortgage lender now to give you the money that you want. So you may have to actually put in 2 applications simultaneously just to cover your back, especially if it's high risk that it's going to have an impact, because there's a lot of domino effects on things that if they don't happen. For example, there's certain developers that have developed 10 properties, and their exit always was to hold on to the properties and refinance them. But if the 5 lenders that are going to give them the best rate fit the criteria that they need to be able to get the amount of equity they need out of the asset to be able to have the continuity of business, then if out of those 4 or 5 key lenders, there's only one left, and their criteria is to only lend you on 3 properties, then what they're going to do, they're going to have to either sell the assets or make a go of the situation. So I think some of the issues are also with the mindset of some of the people that are actually in these situations, because if you can't get finance and it's had an effect on your credit record, you're going to have an issue. You may have to look at other alternatives. That's why we set up this group, which is to maybe change your mindset. You may have to sell something that you weren't looking to sell before because the market doesn't allow you to get finance easily because of your credit file. You may also want to consider bridging, although it's expensive. If you've still got good credit file and we've approached a friendly lender, which is a private lender, they'll still lend you money at a higher rate, but they may be able to solve the problem. So one solution could be to sell something. The other solution could be to use bridging finance. A third solution could be that there's access to business loans or personal loans that you can get, which may be at a good rate, and you may not realize you can do asset-backed lending for your business as well. So I think you've got to really think out the box, because anything that was out there that was traditionally done in the last 5 or 10 years, half of those solutions now are not workable. You can't just go out and do a normal mortgage anymore. You really got to be on your feet. You've got to be thinking, how do I actually have all my ducks lined up? You can't really have enough ducks lined up in this market because there's lots of unknowns and lots of variables.
Okay, you're saying it's I think something that we could give to Bob Singh, and Bob Singh has obviously just joined us, so it'd be excellent, I think, for you to put these 2 parties together for him to give them best advice. Interesting, Julie said about the fact that she really is a bit of a bridge between tenants who can't pay, not won't pay, but can't pay. And we've got another one of our group members, Mr. Mohsin, and there are a few people like that out there who are trying to help, or at least assist people in getting rehoused. And I think that's going to be a big issue, whether interest rates go up or not. I mean, where the government is at the moment. I think there was someone the other day, a Manchester United footballer, I think, who made a particular point about food and hunger, and the fact the government had to do more in providing food vouchers, possibly, or food for families who are going to go into financial hardship. And Mohsin mentioned that about 8 million families were a paycheck away from becoming homeless. Now, what do you have to say to what Julie does? Because it's admirable, because there's not many people who are, again, going to the nature of what Julie does. It seems that she's got this tenable nature of finding the gaps and carving out something that's unique, and trying to solve things, which is always the Lakhi Singh way, because you're a fixer and you're a troubleshooter and a problem solver. So what do you have to say to what Julie does? And can you see there is it's going to be a broader demand for this? And do you feel that you would have some common interest with Julie in assisting people who are going to suffer as a consequence, not even of the financial, that just because the government's going to run out of money, they're not going to have any more money to give, there's not going to be any more, furloughs, and the bounce backs will finish, and Sybils will finish, and then people will be left with no businesses overnight without any financial support, and then they're not going to be able to afford, like Julie says, they will not be able to pay their rent. It's not that they are not paying, they cannot afford to pay. So do you feel there's an angle there where you could probably tap into Julie's abilities and work with other people on this platform we've got to help people who are going to be in financial hardship, Lakhi? Where do you say there would be some angle on it in helping others, or even going outside of hem or hem because she's limited?
So I think what happens is when you're on a very clear path of what you're doing, which is fixing problems, what happens is when you got a very strong intention to do that, all the right people turn up anyway. So Julie's turned up. That's really a good start. So, I knew who Julie was because we were connected on Facebook, but now got into the nooks and crannies of her expertise, which is that she is actually a problem solver in a niche, and the type of thinking and the angle that she's got could be invaluable for probably millions of landlords out there who are probably pulling their hair out at the moment. So I think definitely we need about how many? About 50,000 Julie Fords in this world, because there's not enough Fords in the world, because it's actually the issues that people are having now are actually on the the way most put it, which is a problem away from a sort of one-day paycheck. If it doesn't come in, they're going to have a massive problem. So from that point of view, I think definitely Julie and I think we'll have a chat, and I don't really have the ability to every single thing, and the more experts we get in niches, I'll also introduce her to a couple of other people, Julie, which could make all that difference to you. So there's also Charles Anderson who works with us, who's a specialist in rehousing tenants as well, who can't afford their tenants, who are on benefits. So that speeds tracks the exit for the tenant, and it allows the landlord to then remarket the property for letting without that becoming a problem for the landlord, but it bridges the gap. So I think that team of Julie, Charles, and a few other specialists that we work with is a sort of expert panel that we'll be adding on to the Facebook group. So if we can get you on here as maybe regular commentators or experts, we set this group up for free basically. So anybody calls me, I actually make it a point to just drop everything and give them my time. So it is a 24-hour service. That's why I've got a few bags under my eyes at the moment, because I actually like to sort of work 24 hours. It's a bit boring otherwise. Yeah. Okay. So I run my own rocket ship, which is actually 24 hours anyway.
Okay. Julie, that question goes back to you. I know you're working, operating within Hemel Hempstead. Before I ask you to answer that question, got a shout out from an A&B Videos, I think, or a company that's watching us YouTube. They like what we are talking about. That's very good. And we've also got Cameron, who asked the question. He's a sweet young boy we had on yesterday with a lot of energy, a six-pack. So I've got 5 more to get to his stage. He says, I haven't got a credit card. Tell me, should I get one and what should I do with it? My advice is get one and give it to me, but I can give you a more matured advice from Lakhi Singh in a bit. Julie, what do you got to say to what Lakhi said? And I know you're operating in Hemel Hempstead. Do you think you could probably broaden your service and work with other people who are just as helpful, I would say, and empathetic as you are, because you seem to have a clear business head, but you also seem to have a lot of empathy in you and realize the knock-on effects of what's happening in the present market. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, just because I'm based in Hemel Hempstead doesn't mean I only operate my business in Hemel Hempstead. So because of the nature of what I do, a lot of it is office based. A lot of it I can do like we're doing now. I can do Zoom calls, etc., etc. So I don't physically need to be with tenants and landlords. So I do operate across the UK at the moment. I've got a landlord who's got their property up in Liverpool. I work in central London. I work wherever I need to work, wherever a landlord or a letting agent is that's got a problem. So at the moment, I am pretty flexible in that respect. But it's just, for me, there just seems to be a bit of a barrier. And I think that barrier is communication when it comes to landlords and letting agents. I think when landlords are self-managing and there's a problem with the tenant, they take everything so extremely personally. And instead of looking at it from a business point of view, there is a problem, we need to resolve it. Like, for example, if you don't pay your credit card bill, your credit card company will ring you and ask you, what is the problem? How can we help? When a tenant doesn't pay their rent, the landlord goes, where's my money? I'm going to evict you. It's a completely different mindset. And letting agents are very much the same with regards to, I think, a fear of just picking up the phone and just asking a tenant, what is wrong? How can I help? What's the situation? You know, that phone call might be the only phone call that person gets.
Isn't it, at the end of the day, isn't the nature of the landlord and the agent about the money, about the business? And isn't that why it's slightly different when you have a tenant who can't pay, not who won't pay, but can't pay? Because obviously you get anomalies. You get tenants who won't pay. That's different. Someone who can't pay, obviously you've got to take into appreciation that the landlord needs that money. If he's managing his property portfolio and each property is a individual unit, a business in its right, if he's managing like a business, it's all right to say he's got, £20,000 cash flow so he can absorb the mortgage payment for that property by paying from the cash flow. But if you really look at it honestly, if that unit has to run efficiently, he needs the money, pay the mortgage. Now, surely it's because of the nature of the relationship. The nature of the relationship of a tenant with the property is it's his abode. It's where he wants his right of peaceful existence. It's his home while he's renting it. But for the landlord, it's an income tool, isn't it? It's an asset. And the landlord, not necessarily out of belligerence, more out of necessity, can't really afford to allow someone to live in the property for more than a certain time, because then the laws around property and the way the properties are managed in the United Kingdom make it necessary for him to be slightly more belligerent, because he doesn't get paid any money from his insurance until he doesn't get rid of the tenant, doesn't give him notice. I mean, isn't the system designed in a way to be very aggressive, and therefore landlords can't afford to be empathetic? Lakhi, what do you say to that first, before we go back to Julie and ask her the answer on that question? Before we do that, we have the question you need to answer. What does Mr. Cameron do with his credit card? Does he give it to me to spend for him? Or how should he use his credit? Give him your best financial advice, being that you're from the planet Krypton and you don't need money there, apparently, having superpowers, you don't need to eat.
Okay, so it's very simple, Cameron. Number one, credit cards really are a tool, not in terms of building up your credit profile. They're not necessarily there to really use it really for your shopping and things like that. But the way you need to use it is really as a business tool. So there's a technique of using it where you take out 2-3 credit cards and you start making small payments from each one and build up your credit so that the credit companies start offering you 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 pounds of credit over a period of 3 to 6 months.
Wise man, Lakhi Singh. A man.
So that if they're giving you money to borrow, and you can borrow it at 0 credit, then technically you've got free money as well if you wanted to use it. But you've got to be wise how you use it. So that's something you can build up over 3 months, 6 months, a year. But I wouldn't really use it in reality for actually spending and actually leveraging off it, because it's gonna be more, the cost of actually those credit cards could be quite high if not clever. So that's the first question. The second question is around landlords and their cash pots, really how they're impacted and really how all that works. So I think it is a little bit of a double-edged sword actually in terms of this conversation, because on the whole, anybody who's actually a tenant in the property, they're actually just thinking about their day-to-day living and their livelihoods. So it's a very human type situation for them. Whereas for a landlord, the majority of landlords actually we're doing this for business purposes, at least 95%. You may have some landlords who've got ample money. They're happy to let it go because they're the extra nice, friendly landlord who will give their left arm for people because they're very human in what they do. But I would say the majority actually run it for business purposes. And but I think if they're quite clever and they're quite shrewd, then if they consider the issues of the tenant living in there and they're more empathetic, then there's more likely that they're going to get a resolution by having somebody like Julie there who can actually offset the difference between the business requirement and the human requirement.
Excellent. Okay, that makes a lot of sense there. But we go back to what Mr. Ninder Singh Johal said a few weeks ago. Anybody signing on the dotted line, taking out a loan for the purpose of buying a property that's going to give them cash flow, income, a business, they have to be business-like. So is business-like being aggressive, being sort of non-human in their dealings with a person who's living? It's not like a business, is it? It's not like a restaurant where people come in and eat food and pay you for it, and someone comes along and says, well, I'm going to eat the food, I'm not going to pay you for it, because then you're going to sling them out of your restaurant. Where someone lives in your property, that is their home, their abode, while they're living there. And there is a different mental positioning. And the landlord is somewhat in a position where if they go more than two, I mean, if you look at the terms and the conditions of these contracts, they are quite draconian. Now you're taking out about £200,000 on a loan to buy a Buytolet. You put about £40,000 of a deposit. Now, if you don't pay for 2 months or more, technically the bank can take the property back under the LPA receiver law. That's very draconian for a large amount of investment. And maybe some of these things have to be revised. They need to go back under the drawing board and take them back. And there has to be some more due consideration on these things. But at the moment, we are where we are, just like Donald Trump says, we are where we are. So, Julie, What say you to Lakhi's answer on it? And can there be a perfect balance? And is it just about rehousing people? Can you just rehouse people, and are they happy to be rehoused? And they've got kids.
I think it's a really good point that you're making there about it's a person's home, and I think sometimes that can be lost on a landlord a little bit. But exactly that, it is a business and it has to be run like a business. But it's like with any business, like you use the example, and a good example, but the tenants also need to stand. If they keep going to that restaurant and eating the food and not paying for it, soon that restaurant's going to run out of food and it's not going to be able to provide food. So it's exactly the same way. If the tenant isn't paying the rent and can't pay the rent, soon that property is going to run out because the landlord isn't going to be able to sustain it. So it's an understanding from both parties. And I think that's where, again, communication is so important, because if a landlord approaches a tenant who cannot pay rent and says, look, this is why I need you to pay your rent, because I can't pay a mortgage, therefore the house is going to be taken away from you and it's out of my control. If there was more understanding of the logistics between everything, I think there would be a better structure in regards to keeping people housed, because just rehousing someone isn't resolving the problem. It's just moving it on to somewhere else and giving it another 6 months, and then it's a problem again. We need to get back to the bare bones of what the actual issue is.
Okay, Julie, we need you on again because you've got a wealth of knowledge there. And I think there's lots of topics which are affecting people now as we speak, and it's going to get worse. I think you're the type of person who will have a lot to give back to the audience. We're on 900 plus on as far as our group memberships are concerned. We've got lots of people on YouTube now following us. Lakhi, thank you so much. Julie, thank you so much for your time and the drive time. We have run out of time, but over time. Julie, you will be invited on again because I think there's lots more for us to learn from you. Lakhi Singh, the property fixer, for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., 9 a.m. We've got another caller on tomorrow, and we invite everyone to kindly press the dial button and ask the questions yourself. Take care.